Hey, it's Carrie.
And Ashley.
We welcome you to the Self-Care Cafe. We are both health professionals and moms and nature lovers and food lovers and love helping women get over dieting and just start living. We think that talking about bodies and perfect bodies and dieting is just boring.
Did we put you to sleep there, Carrie?
Yes. So if you are ready to ditch dieting and get to living and talk about more important things, then you are in the right place. We don't put shame and guilt on the menu here. You don't even have to tip us.
Nope.
Come hang with us. The advice is free. We want to have a bunch of girlfriends to just hang out with and get real with, and it's time to start living, ladies. Hey, Ashley.
Hi, Carrie.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
Oh, super duper.
Yeah.
We have a fun, what's on the menu for today?
I don't know. What is on the menu for today?
We have a fun topic.
That's right.
Oh.
So we're continuing our intuitive eating series.
Mm-hmm.
So this week we're still in the breaking up with dieting phase, which is still phase 1. And so this week
It's a long phase.
it is.
It's a long breakup.
It is. It's a long breakup, but it's totally worth it. And it's easy to go back and forth, and that's okay.
Don't go back to him.
Right. Yeah. So this week we're talking about the intuitive eating principle number 4, which is called challenge the food police. And this one is not really my favorite one, but I feel like it's got a lot of good information in it still.
So I'm curious, why isn't it your favorite?
I don't know. I feel like, and maybe because it's not something that I've had to deal with a lot in the past personally, so maybe I don't like connect with it very much, but I also feel like some of the things are talked about in other principles almost. I'm not really sure. I can't
Yeah,
really.
a lot of what we're going to talk about today is not new information compared to what we said before, right? But we know that repetition helps you learn, and sometimes the way, if we say it differently, you might get that aha moment, or oh yes, I do relate to that.
Yeah.
So food police, what does that mean?
What does that mean? And I feel like it might be different for everybody, but food police is kind of like the gatekeepers, I think, almost of your food choices, right? So anything, or like a bouncer, right? Like the
That's awesome.
bouncer of your brain when it has to do with thinking about food.
You can go in, you're not allowed. Let me see your ID.
Exactly.
That's
So,
awesome.
so we can be our own food police. And often that is the case. But when we think about that, and I just am kind of putting this together, even though it makes sense. Even when we're our own food police, we've gotten the trickle down from somewhere else, right? So like if we believe one thing to be true about food or food choices, then that information has come from somewhere else. Otherwise, we wouldn't have probably gotten to that.
Right. So it can come from family, friends, your healthcare providers, the media, and the other thing too is it can actually still be some people in your life right now that are still acting as food police for you, right? So, you're at a family gathering and Auntie Mabel is like, "Do you really need that, dear? Should you be eating that? You can eat that without bread." Right? Like there can still be, it's in our head, but there can actually still be physically people in our lives that are still kind of are keeping the gatekeepers and trying to keep tabs on us and what we're eating.
Exactly. Yeah. it kind of boils down to, like we always talk about, kind of putting your nutrition under that microscope.
Mm,
And it really keeps us from trusting our body because we're always second guessing. So whether it's Aunt Mabel or ourselves or something we see and it's like, oh, do we do this? Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Like we're always sort of second guessing our
mm.
choices because we all kind of feel like there's a quote unquote like right way to eat. And does this measure up or not? Yeah. And back to your family example too, I feel like it could go the other way. Like some people are more along the lines of like food pushers,
Yes,
right? It
yes.
can go either way. Like, oh,
Yeah,
just
good.
try this because it's fresh out of the oven or it's my only batch for the year or whatever.
And in that case, I know people, it's not like they've almost taken on the food that they make as their identity, and
Hmm.
it bumps their self-esteem up some when people eat their food and enjoy it, right? It's like
Right.
equated to love for
Yeah.
them.
Hmm.
And but and we're going totally well, not really off topic, but in that case, that you have to keep in mind that's their issue,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That not to take that on, that if it's a food that you don't like or doesn't agree with you, or you're full and just cannot eat anymore, and sometimes I'll make a joke, stop being a pusher. you
Mhm.
know
Right.
um so yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, because it can go either way. Either the ones that are um gatekeeping and trying to keep you from eating, and then there's the ones that are trying to push you to eat.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, it's like their form of love, I guess,
Hmm.
like you said.
That,
And
yeah.
really tricky because you feel bad when you're
Hmm.
not taking them up on that, especially if they're very persistent about it. Um, and that just might be, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more coming up, but it's just something you got to set boundaries about and maybe have a
Hmm.
conversation with them. Like, I really appreciate that you're doing this and I'm too full or whatever it is. So, can we do
Hmm.
something else together?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So what would be some ways that the food police show up?
Yeah, great question. Um, a lot of times it's this whole good food, bad food
Mm-hmm.
dichotomy that we have going on. Um, and so some foods are seen as like morally better because they have more nutrition to offer us, and some foods are seen as bad and morally bad because they're higher in sugar, higher in fat, higher in calories, salt, whatever it is. Um, and so what has happened in our society is that when we eat foods from either category, we then assign ourselves that label. So if we're eating mostly fruits and veggies, which are most of the time in the quote unquote good category, oh, then we're good. We're doing a good job. We can be good people today, which blows my mind.
We
And I
gold star for.
yeah, I hear this so much. Like part of my client visits is most of the time hearing about like what a typical day of eating is for people. And I bet 90% of people were like, oh, I was good today and had this, or oh, I was bad today and had that. Um, it's really interesting how
Mm,
how much we really believe this. Um, and when we eat foods from the bad category, like I said, we kind of label ourselves as bad. And then a lot of times guilt and shame come along with that. And it's not only about like, oh, I was good today because I had this. Like this language is everywhere. It's on food
mm,
packages, even like um
mhm.
sinful chocolate cake or something like that on a menu. Like, what? Or um I was somewhere, I won't say their name out loud, but it was like guiltless grill options or something, and I'm like, nope, we missed
Mhm.
that one." Or like guilt-free this or
Yep.
skinny this, like it just is everywhere.
Yeah, and I know. I try not to support brands, or at least, the foods um that have that kind of wording on it. Um and that is one way that you can try to get companies to change, is to not give them your money,
Yep. And I was
right?
just thinking, I haven't gone into the grocery store in a while because if you've been listening to the podcast, I do more grocery pickup on my ordering. But I was just thinking, like, I could probably spend so much time. Like, first of all, I'd have to be looking, so that would take time. But also, I would be stopping to take a lot of pictures of all the different brands that slightly, even just on the front, like, I'm not going to stand there and turn it over and check either, but um, that would take so much time.
Mm-hmm.
It probably
Yeah.
also depends on, like, where you're grocery shopping. I feel like, co-ops might not necessarily get into it that much, but I'm not really sure either. They don't have as many, like, mainstream brands all of the time, depending on
Hmm.
where you are.
Hmm. Yeah, they're more focused on fresh local.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, so what's something that we can do to kind of catch, like, if we're like, how do you know if you're doing, what's some, like, language people might use
Oh,
to,
people yeah,
so
people
that they we've already mentioned some of it, but
yeah, I so another example of things is, like, um, I when I was working at the hospital full time, there was a cafeteria there. So I feel like a lot of people thought I was the food police there. And so it was interesting to see people's reactions when I would walk through the cafeteria and the dining room or whatever. Some people would definitely like shift their food choices away or like put their body in front of it so that I couldn't see what they were doing. And there is a point to the end of this to answer your question. Um, a lot of people would make eye contact with me, and I knew a lot of people, so I would normally chat with people, and so they would make comments about their food choices as if I cared so much about what they were eating. Things like calories don't count on Friday, or I had salad for lunch, so I'm having this bigger meal for dinner, or like justifying their fried food options, or I don't know. It was just really interesting to see the difference as soon as I entered the realm of the food choices. Um, and so yeah, so those are a couple things that people might say. Um, I was good because I had fruits and veggies, or I had yogurt for breakfast, or I was bad because I had pizza, or I cheated this weekend and had
cheat
donuts.
word.
Yeah, that's another one. It's very sticky, tricky.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I read it. We were talking before. I've for years, the same type of thing in the grocery store. People either avoid me, or they'll um, be like, "Oh, I know, I shouldn't be buying this," or it's like, "I'm not judging your cart. Like,
Exactly.
just stop. It's not, Uh, yeah. We're so hard on ourselves, and so, I mean, I suppose some of it is because of being, there are healthcare practitioners,
Mhm.
though, that would be right.
Right.
So in a way that, we've been kind of conditioned toward that too.
Yeah,
So it's not really our faults. It's just, um, the way that things have gone for years now.
yeah. And not only with the good and bad foods, but, like, food rules also, but one thing I wanna throw in before we get into that is instead of necessarily thinking as foods as good or bad, we can try to reframe our thought process about that and say all foods are neutral. Like, we don't have to assign a moral value to them. Um, all foods fit, like we say all the time. And yes, we want to, nourish our body with foods that have nutrition, and we want to include foods that are fun. And
Right.
as we talk about all the time, when we're restricting one or the other, then something's not going to end up Like we're trying to balance ourselves by doing that, but we're actually really disrupting the balance. And
Hmm.
so trying to do that all foods fit can really be helpful and doing it on purpose and intentionally and really picking up on all of that like good, bad food language. You'd be
Hmm.
surprised at how often you hear it, I bet.
Yeah, when you start noticing it and intentionally starting to pay attention to it, it is it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's in your head, it's in your own head too, but it's everywhere. People um talking, of course, like Mondays are a great one, right? Coming back after the weekend, be, oh, I totally blew my diet. I was horrible. I was right. It's
Yes. You know what's interesting about that, Carrie, is I bet that is mostly not to not to enforce gender stereotypes, but I feel like women talk about that a lot more in the break room on Mondays than men do because women talk about how bad they were for eating pizza on their family vacation, but men talk more about what they actually did.
yes. Yep,
And that's
absolutely.
exactly we need to let go of that guilt about it and enjoy our time.
Yeah. Yeah, when you think like at the end of your life, how much time will you have spent talking about how horrible your body is and how much you blew it and how much you sucked it? you know, like just a lot of wasted time and energy at it instead of living your life.
And not to mention who else is listening. Like, are you talking like that with your kids around? And do you want this for them as they're growing up? Um,
Right.
because we're the role models. And it's really something that I feel like we all want to get out of. It's not fun.
Right.
We just don't really know how to do it because it's really difficult.
That's what we're here for.
Exactly.
Okay, so food rules.
Yeah. So food rules are kind of like anything you have in place that dictates what, when, how much you eat, basically, right? So, um, I can't eat, I'm just making this up. I can't eat white English muffins because they don't have enough nutrition and they're bad, for example.
Hmm. Or I can't eat past 7 o'clock.
Right. Or I can't eat dressing on my salad
Mm.
or anything like that.
And
And
what's so interesting is that certain rules actually are more harmful nutrition, like right, because a lot of vegetables, the nutrients are better absorbed in your body when they're eaten with a little fat.
exactly. So that's super true. So you actually need to eat, well, I guess you don't need to eat, but it is helpful to get the nutrition into your body better when you eat
Mhm.
something with fat on your salad, also known as salad dressing,
AKA.
aka. So that's really interesting. That's such a great point. Like the rules we have can be so backwards when we actually look at science and what
Mm.
is truthful.
Yep.
And like we
Yeah.
said earlier, it just kind of like keeps yourself, it keeps you pitted against your body because your body's telling you one thing, oh, that salad dressing sounds really good. And then you're telling it, no, we can't have it because it's too fattening or it's too whatever.
Yeah, and usually the fat in salad dressing is an oil,
Hmm.
and oils like our bodies need fat. Eh,
Right.
We need fat. It's a nutrient,
Hmm.
and um, if you don't have it, then your skin, different things that you can actually see on the outside, like skin gets all dry
Hmm.
and things like that. But there's other things on the inside that the reasons we need fat too.
Yeah. And we might not notice those. And that's
Right.
a whole different story for a whole different day. Yeah, and then other rules have come with us from childhood probably. A big one is that you have to clean your plate. Um, rule, that one is such a challenging one.
Clean
because
Plate Club.
what was that? Yeah,
Clean Plate Club.
it's such a challenging one because it's every meal all the time that you've been dealing with this for a long, long time. And it's really hard to break that habit because it's a habit now, right?
Right.
We're not listening to our fullness cues. We might not even have or notice fullness cues at this point. So that one's a really tricky one. But it's all the things like that. So um I don't know if your family restricted you from eating also, you might be rebelling against food rules
Hmm.
as well. So it can go again either way. It can be the gatekeeper or like the food pushers
Hmm.
with the food rules.
Right. And sometimes you'll eat alone to
Mm,
avoid judgment.
yeah.
Uh,
So you have people that are always commenting on your body, your plate, your choices, whatever. You might tend to start eating more in secret or just trying to eat alone and waiting to eat. Unless, if you're really hungry and everyone's eating, then we have to make up an excuse about why we're not eating. And then we're going to eat later to avoid all those comments.
or you might avoid gatherings,
Mhm.
right? You might avoid family gatherings or going out with friends, because either someone makes a comment or maybe you just can't stand the pressure that, the other, oh, I'm just going to have salad, and you wanted to go and have a nice meal and you feel guilty or feel pressure not to do that. It's just not enjoyable anymore.
Yeah.
um yeah, there's all kinds of twists and turns to that one.
Yeah. And if we're eating in rebellion, sometimes we're eating a lot
Right.
because of how we might have been restricted in the past, especially. Um,
Mhm.
This can also happen if people have experienced like food scarcity in their childhood as well. So it's similar as far as the biological response, but different as far as why it was happening in your household. So if your family restricted you um, from sweets or portion sizes or whatever, um, you never really had the opportunity to regulate or balance like your cravings or preferences and how you dealt with them, right? And the same with food scarcity. People just kind of have to eat when they have food and they
Mhm.
don't get to rely on their bodies as much. So all those things can come into play for sure.
Absolutely. So what do you do? How do we identify which food police is running our show?
You got to pay attention. That's our first thing all the time. Like you
Start
have,
now.
right, you have to just take a step back. And when you have any thoughts about food or nutrition, just hold on a second and say, okay, where did that come from? Is that a food rule? Um, how do I feel about that? And also, like, who said it? Where did it come from? Is this true? Kind of conversation, too. And like we said, we might think that it's true, but is it actually true? And that one's a really hard one because sometimes we can get really frustrated with, oh, we've been doing this for 20 years and oh, this information's actually false. Or there can be some anger and frustration, grief sometimes around thinking about this stuff.
And it's tricky too because through the years, information does change. Like
Hmm.
when I was in college, the whole cholesterol thing, like you couldn't, if like eggs, they were saying eggs increase cholesterol. Now we know that that's probably not true, or it has minimal impact on our cholesterol levels in our bodies. Um, all kind like the low fat thing, and then the no fat thing was in back then. So and they were saying, and practitioners were pushing this, saying that no, you shouldn't have any fat, and obviously we know that that is not true at all now anymore.
Right.
So nutrition information, as research has increased and gotten better, um, it's changed. So, but sometimes you get stuck on that old one, right? Because if we were we formed that habit like, oh, fat is bad, fat is bad, fat is bad, then that comes with us. And it is hard to break, and it's hard to wrap your mind around it. But if you get onto some credible resources that can explain how fat is not bad and why it's not and how it actually works in your body, and emphasis on credible, because there's so
Mhm.
much information out there
I
on the
was
internet.
just I was just gonna pull that in too, like, sometimes
Mhm.
we just stick with the original one because there's so much information out there, and I hear this a lot from clients also, like, they are, recommended a diet to follow by their provider maybe, or they are researching this new condition they have and find out about this diet that's supposed to help with this condition, and they just get so frustrated with some websites say eat this and some websites say don't eat that. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to do? And so I think that contributes to all this confusion. And we often just stick with what we've already been doing so that we're not rocking the boat or whatever.
Yeah, it's easier. I mean, let's face it, not changing a habit is a lot easier. And
So
then
much easier.
try to change it too, or like you said, rocking the boat, because who wants to disagree with their doctor,
Right.
right? And but doctors have very little nutrition education
Mhm.
in med school.
Yeah.
So unless they've taken extra training, your best bet would be to get a referral to a
Mhm.
registered dietitian.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the plugs.
Thought you'd like that plug, and maybe it would be Ashley.
All right. What
Uh,
are some other ways we can do some different things?
well, how about setting boundaries with friends and family?
That one's such a good one. This one might be one of the hardest ones.
It's a hard
Because
one, especially to avoid conflict.
yeah, because
Uh,
it's not just you anymore.
right.
It's, you know, let's go back to Aunt Mabel. Aunt Mabel, I have to talk to her now, and you know your family members best. So is she gonna take the news well? Do you think she's gonna, you know, not take it well? And sometimes I think that's worse is just like playing the what if game. How is she gonna react? You really don't know until you do it. Um, because we can imagine this whole scenario going 100 different ways, those of us that might be overthinkers. Um, and
No.
hmm.
So
So
I have a good little
oh,
tip for that. So if you do, if this happens, or what if, then turn it around. If then, so if she says this, then I will respond this way. But also important to remember, don't try not to react, right?
mhm,
So in practice, like regardless of whatever she says over here, how will you respond to that
right,
without doing this, I'm friggin' sick of you saying that.
right,
Stop it, try to respond to it. Because also coming from a place of understanding maybe and some empathy, because obviously she struggles with this, right? So saying, I understand that this is a struggle for you, seems to be a struggle for you or a difficult topic for you. And I appreciate you try, because I know you love me and care about me, and I appreciate you trying to give that advice. But I'm figuring this out on my own, so I'd appreciate it if you, right,
right. Yeah, like the
back
bo
off.
yeah, the bottom line is please don't comment on my food choices or what I'm eating or the amounts that I'm eating. Like just shush.
Mhm. Yeah, and depending on your personality, where you're at with all of it, you might be able to just let her comments roll off your back too.
Right.
Like some people can do that and be like, whatever. It's just who she is, that she's always like this. I feel bad for her that she, feels like she has to do that. So there's different ways to approach it. And there's no one right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
But if it really, really gets to you, and it's constant, having that conversation, there's another way to do it too. When you ABC, it makes me feel XYZ, Instead, can we do re mi? Okay. So Auntie Mabel, when you say ABC, right? So when you say this, it makes me feel, because people can't argue with how it makes you feel,
Right.
right? Because and then she might realize, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to make you feel like that, right? So it makes me feel this. Instead, can we, maybe let's not talk about this, and um whatever it is, and that can open up a conversation too, without that putting either of you on the defense.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So
For sure. Yeah. And I have mixed feelings about the when you do this, it makes me feel like this. Some people, I don't know. If they're really close family, then yeah, they probably do care how they're making you feel. But does everybody? Mm, I don't
but
know. I
should you
hope so.
not close family, should you even care what they think?
True. And that's like you said
I
earlier, like
that
it depends on how the comments are making you feel. Like if it's
right.
excessive and if it's just this one party, like you should still advocate for yourself, obviously, but if you're able to just like let it roll, then whatever. Like if someone said something about my food choices or my plate, I would just be like, yeah, that's what I'm doing, whatever, because I'm confident in my ability to do
Right. Or
my
yeah, this is good, you should try some. Right.
exactly, exactly.
Make
So,
out of it or whatever. It's yeah, like we said, there's not one way to do it. And yeah, that ABC one is probably more for people closer to you. You're not going to do it to some, acquaintance at a party.
right.
Uh yeah, that's not when you would use it. But yeah.
Yeah.
So
And then setting boundaries around the people that are encouraging you to eat also, like we talked about earlier, like the flip side, like if
mhm.
it's constantly Aunt Mabel again, um,
Mabel.
definitely time for that conversation. Like, I really appreciate that this is how you show me your affection, whatever. And I need you to back off a little bit, like, or
Mm,
wait for me to ask about your recipe or your food or whatever. Um, or just take what I'm telling you and, stop asking me after that. Right.
or
Like,
another diplomatic way too could be oh, I would love to have some more right now. I cannot fit another bite in me, but I'd love to take some home, if you've got a container or
right.
something like that.
It's a great one.
And then you do what you want with it.
Exactly. You can eat it or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So,
Um,
I guess,
else.
yeah, like if we're turning away from the food police and the food rules, then what? We have to start getting curious, right? Like, what do we do? Because this food rule might be with us for, or has been with us for quite a long time.
Mm. And remember, like Ashley already meant, it's a habit
Hmm.
and have to take time to change. It's that pathway in your brain, and it's just your brain's go-to. So don't get down on yourself if it takes, like, don't turn it around now to be like, oh, I'm so stupid, why do I think like that? Like
Right.
that's not the point of this. The point is to start noticing the language that you're using with yourself and with others, and maybe you're the food police for someone.
Right.
You
Oh, I
hadn't
didn't
mentioned
think about
that.
that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So are noticing that, whether it's the language that comes out of your mouth or the language that is just in your head, that little voice. Maybe it's a look that you give someone, like, really, you have to eat, like whatever it is, just start noticing first,
Yep.
and then start challenging it. Like, okay, here's the belief that keeps popping up. Is this true? And like really challenge that, though, because initially you're going to want to say, yeah, it's true, but
Yep.
really challenge that belief.
Yeah. And ask a lot of questions after, once you are sort of working through some of this stuff, like just get curious. That's what I do a lot. Like when I'm making food choices, I probably ask myself at least 5 questions before I choose something, which sounds like so much work, but I feel like it's better than running through a list of food rules, because that puts you in more of a negative, like I can't, you shouldn't, whatever kind of language, as opposed to do I feel like, or do I have, or what do I feel like, more open-ended questions too.
So like what are there specific questions you ask yourself? Like
Um,
am I something like crunchy or smooth or creamy or
I guess so. I guess I probably don't run through that list exactly because I think it's more of like, what do I feel like? And then I think I run through kind of like, what are the options I have? And then I don't necessarily think crunchy, salty, sweet
okay.
exactly, but it's in there. It's just
Yeah.
not as, because it's so well practiced for me, I think, that I just can jump to it instead of running
Mm,
through all of
yeah.
the options, I guess. I never really thought about it like that. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's good.
I,
It's good
that was
because
good. I was
people,
getting curious.
no, exactly. People whose first time it is, yeah, that would be a great question. Like, what do I feel like? Is it something crunchy or am I even hungry? Let's go back. Um, is it something crunchy? Is it something salty, something sweet? All of those options. Um, and then what is available to me and then narrowing it down from there. That's definitely a great way to start putting these things into practice. Um, and when we're getting curious, we're really only making observations. We're not making judgments, right? Like, let's say we had breakfast at 7, and then by 8:30 we're trying to figure out whether we're hungry or not. And instead of being like, oh, you shouldn't be hungry because you just ate an hour ago or an hour and a half ago, well, what did I have earlier? It obviously didn't fill me up. We don't have to judge it. We can just say, this is what's happening right now. And how can I nourish my body now?
Right, right. Yeah, and that remember that question too, am I hungry? Because if you're not, our blueprint for the emotional
Mhm.
part, right? Maybe your body needs something else to quote unquote nourish it.
Mhm.
That's not food.
Right. And back to the breakfast example, too. If we notice that we're eating this particular breakfast at 7 and then at 8:30 every day we're really hungry, that's fine. We can keep doing that. And if it's not really working into your day, like if you're just getting to work at 8:30 and you're trying to get your day started,
Mm,
but you're starving, that's not helpful, because it's gonna be a pain to figure out food at that time because you're just getting into work and everything. And if you put it off, then you're probably not going to be as clear, with your work and everything. So then we can say, "Oh, I've noticed this pattern about my food choices, and this isn't probably working for me." Or maybe it is, but that's up to you to decide. And so how can I adjust it to meet my schedule better or whatever?
right. Yeah, and if you are someone like you've said before, you can't eat a whole lot first thing in the morning, right? So if you're that kind of person, so if you eat something light and then that hunger keeps falling like first thing at work, right? What is there something you could take with you that's an easy snack? Can you sip on a smoothie at work, or what can you do at work when you get there to
Right. And
squash that hunger?
exactly, and it's not that all or nothing, like, just because I had whatever it was for breakfast and it's making me hungry an hour and a half later, that doesn't mean I can never have that for breakfast again, right? We don't have to
Right,
automatically flip it. We can say, "What can we do," like Carrie just said, "to adjust? Because I still like this food and I wanna include it, and this is how it makes me feel, so how can I, change it up just a little bit to make it work a little better for me?"
right.
And there's another example,
I example.
yeah, I do too. There's this other example about how we can easily go from eating something to negative, so I'll never eat it again. So here's the example. Every time I eat pizza, I feel unhappy with my body the next day. So I shouldn't be eating pizza.
Boom. All or nothing.
Right. Like I can completely see this happening though, because we're eating this quote unquote bad food And so then it makes me feel bad and I'm physically feeling bad in my body. So I'm never going to eat it again. And that's
It's
maybe right.
level of guilt.
Yeah. And that might be reasonable for some people, but if pizza is something that you really enjoy eating, I definitely enjoy eating pizza,
Me
um,
too.
in lots of different flavors and ways. And so that doesn't make sense because like we've talked about a lot, like restriction sets us up for terrible things. So
Yeah, because smell pizza again. You're gonna, and then you're gonna just, you may overdo it because it's like, oh, well, this time really mean it. I'm just gonna eat as much as I can, and then I'm never gonna eat it again.
right,
Right.
exactly. And so a way to reframe that or like getting that curious piece is thinking more like, okay, I know that I'm sensitive to salt and pizza's salty, so I'm probably just bloated from the salt from the pizza. I am uncomfortable today and it's temporary. And then you get to decide whether you want to continue to eat pizza or like when you want to eat pizza. So if it's free pizza day at work for lunch, you get to choose. Do I feel like having pizza today, knowing that I might get bloated later tomorrow?
Mhm.
Totally up to you at that point. Maybe yes, maybe no.
Right. And it's not, there's no right or wrong to it. Yeah, it's that no judgment. It's just, it's neutral.
Right.
And you know the results. I know, like, and I have to go through this a lot in my head because with my digestive stuff, um, like I really feel like having this food, but I know I'm probably going to feel pretty crappy tomorrow if I do. And I'll be really bloated, but I could have a little bit of it,
Yeah.
right? That's another thing too, is like maybe not having as much of the food if you know it doesn't really agree with you, your body reacts to it. Obviously, if you're allergic to it, you don't want to have any of it, but it's using common sense and getting out of that all or nothing. Well, I know that having, three slices, I feel crappy the next day. What if I just have one slice? And if that's not going to fill me up, then I can have a side salad
Right.
or whatever with it.
Exactly. And see how Carrie just went through all those questions instead of being like either I can or I can't?
Hmm.
Because when we say we can't, like we talked about, like that restriction's going to kick in, and then we're probably going to have 5 slices and we're going to be back in the same cycle.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
noticing when you're getting into those cycles
Hmm.
as well. So it's just a lot of noticing at first, and intentionality. Is that a word?
Yes, it's, oh, yeah.
But being intentional with just noticing your language, noticing your patterns, um, and noticing how makes you feel too. Um, so that's really the first step with all of this is just start noticing. And
Yes,
that's all I've got to say.
I know. That's it. That's it. And that's really frustrating because to some people, I feel like it's really frustrating because as humans, we all want like, well, tell me what to do and I'll do it, or like I want the answers and everything. And it's so hard because we don't have the answers for you exactly. We only have like the suggestions.
Right. And ultimately, you have the answers,
Right.
uh, because you know your body, you know your life, you're the expert of yourself.
Exactly. I
And
love that. I
so
love that so much.
we're experts, but I don't really like that term. We know a lot about
We know a
these
lot
topics,
about a few things.
right, about these topics that we discuss, but ultimately you are your own expert. And you're kind of like, know, your life. We don't know what kind of life you have, and but with that said, be careful about using that as an excuse too, to not make changes that would benefit you.
Because we can all make little changes, like they can be tiny. And the more tiny changes we make over time, the
Adds
longer
up.
thing they'll be.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
it all adds up. So awesome. Anything else you'd like to add, my dear?
I think we did enough.
This was a good conversation. And again, like a lot of these changes start in your brain, like kind of,
Mhm.
it's which makes it difficult because I know people want concrete. So we try to make it as practical as possible. Um, but that's why we also would love to hear your questions,
Mhm.
thoughts, comments, questions. You know where to get us.
Yeah. All the links are
All
show notes. Exactly. And come to our pod squad
Pod Squad.
first Tuesday of every month, and we just talk about all of our podcast topics a little more in depth. They don't show up on the podcast, so it's private, it's virtual.
Yep. And we answer any questions you have. Yeah, it's a good time.
Definitely.
All right. Awesome.
See you
Until
next
next time. Love you, latte.
time. Latte.